Good evening, welcome. I'm Anastasia. I'm the founder of Globetrotter VR, and today with me, I'm so pleased to have Finn with us, who is our tour guide for our tour of Berlin, which is focused on the LGBTIQ history of the city and why it's been such an important city in the history of the community. And yeah, welcome, Finn. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us and answer some questions.
My pleasure, thank you.
Maybe you can just start by giving a quick introduction about yourself and how you got into being a tour guide and sharing your knowledge about Berlin.
Sure, thank you, Anastasia. Would love to. So my name is Finn Ballard. I'm from Northern Ireland. I lived in England for quite some time before I moved to Berlin in 2008. I studied my doctoral thesis on German folklore. And when I got to Berlin, I wanted to really immerse myself in the history of the city. I live in a neighborhood called Schöneberg, which features in the tour, and that's been the gay village of Berlin for 100 years, really, more or less. And so since I live in this area and since I'm part of this LGBT community myself, that's something that I wanted to focus my energies on, really. But I do many different tours in Berlin, all different in themes. This is the one, though, that I have closest to my heart, I would say. It's a very special one for me.
And you're also a historian, right?
Yeah, what does it mean, really? I think everybody interested in history is a historian, but I'm professionally a tour guide and I teach history, or I was teaching history at two colleges, but that's on hiatus at the moment due to the we know what situation. So I teach American students and I tour mostly with foreign travelers. So of course we had to innovate somewhat in the last year. But yeah, I give lectures, I give tours, I teach history in every possible way that I can, but my main profession is tour guiding.
Mm-hmm. And I've never been to Berlin myself. I've always really wanted to go, and I always, knew about it as this vibrant city that's full of modern art and culture and a great clubbing scene. But I never had the chance to go. Tell us, what is your favorite part of Berlin?
Oh, there's really everything. So the clubbing scene is not so much my world, but many people come to Berlin for that. And it is world renowned for sure. There's a great gastronomy scene. There's a wealth of things to do, really. There are so many, it's a very verdant city. It's very many parks and lakes surrounding Berlin. So it's this metropolis, one of the biggest cities in Europe, almost 4 million people. But within 30 minutes on the bike or train, you can be in the depths of the forest. So I enjoy that particularly. There are more museums in Berlin than rainy days in the year. I think about 120 museums. I have not visited them all myself, I must be honest, but it's just absolutely packed with history. Every single street can tell you so many stories. There's such a diversity of architecture. A lot of that is to do with the circumstances of Berlin in the Second World War and in the Cold War as well. One thing, for instance, which I've become really engrossed in lately is architecture of the Bauhaus era and of the 1920s. And so you can pick a theme really and go about the city, and you couldn't be bored for a second. It'd be a sin to be bored in Berlin. There's just so much to do. So many people come for all manner of reasons. Many come, like I say, for the LGBT scene. But yeah, Benjamin says it's always worth a visit. And Olga, I hope you will come and visit us. Absolutely. It's a special city. It's a very dark history which Berlin confronts, and that's extremely tangible. I would say it's very palpable. You can walk down a city street in Berlin and see bullet damage from World War II, for instance, and see memorials on many streets, residential streets, to Holocaust victims. So we have a type of monument that you'll find actually in many cities of Europe, not only in Germany, but they're known as stumble stones, and they're these brass plaques in front of buildings which tell you about the people who lived there and the fates that befell them. So it's not easy to confront this history on a daily basis. And when you study it and become very attuned to it, of course, you're ever more aware of that. But it's remarkable. The transparency today, the memorial culture in the city as well is something that I think is quite unique and something that I would laud Berlin for. But it's lived through a lot. It's not perhaps the most beautiful city architecturally. There's a great eclecticism of architecture, but it wouldn't be a fairy tale city, not anymore, not since World War II. But if you're interested in 20th century history, then this is the place to come. Absolutely.
It's so interesting. And I think that's what I found really um, mesmerizing when I was doing the tour, when we were, previewing it with the team, is just the amount of monuments, like you said, that are a testament to the history and the stories that, went on in Berlin. And I wanted to get your opinion in terms of what people can expect on the virtual tour. Um, what is sort of the, I guess, the angle and the insights that they can look to get from it?
Sure, thank you, Elyse. And I see in the chat there's the question about how the experience was to film the virtual tour as well. So my filming part with the technology that you're using was quite basic. All I had to do was the introduction and the conclusion. So it was really breathtaking as well for me to see the final result, because my videos otherwise were just shot here at home. So it's a remarkable experience to transfer an in-person live tour into this new format. I think it's as close as it comes, really, the hyper high resolution and the depth of the image as well. And what's remarkable actually about the virtual reality element is that actually we can cover a lot more ground than you could really in that time on a walking tour. So we wouldn't actually be able to get to all these locations in the course of 1 hour. We have to take a couple of days really over it. And so it's great that we can leap around the city. So much of the tour takes place in this gay village area in which I live, Schönenberg, but there is of course LGBTIQ history in other neighborhoods of the city as well. So the VR tour jumps into the city center, actually into the borough called Mitte, just means middle, the historic center of Berlin, and into the old Jewish quarter. So that's a lovely thing, I think, that we can expand the repertoire of the tour in this manner to geographically leap around. That's something really special for sure.
Yeah, I find that fascinating as well. And I think the conversations that we have with our tour guides when we approach them and, onboard them onto Globetrotter VR, and just explaining that, we create these virtual worlds using 360 imagery that people can travel through. And you no longer have to create an experience or a tour that you would have to walk. So you're no longer constricted by physical distance. So you can literally have a tour that's, in one part of the city, jump to another part of the city. And I think that's just fascinating, because what we're creating now is, something like that you've never been actually able to experience, even if you went there physically, which is really interesting. And another thing that I found super cool is the fact that, we've been able to include some photos from the archives that you found, and also that interview that you did. And I want to allude to it and ask you if you wanted to talk about it a little bit more, because I think that's really also a really interesting part of the tour.
Sure, the interview with Frank, you mean?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So Frank Hybrid is a person that I'm very privileged to know. He wrote a book that's very, very important in the rather limited repository that we have of queer history about World War II. So most of the stories of persecution, of course, did not result in a chronicling, let's say. So many people, we're talking about gay men now, specifically in the Nazi era, and many did not survive, of course, or those who did were not able for various reasons to tell their story. Yeah, well, often because they risked being persecuted again, actually. So one thing to say is that after World War II, there still remained, of course, homophobia, it's clear to say, but there still remained even anti-homosexuality legislation in West Germany after the war. And so it wasn't easy to tell a story as a gay survivor. The stories of lesbian survivors are also very, very sparse. And that's something even more difficult to obtain empirical evidence on, because the Nazis didn't officially, they did, of course, but officially they didn't persecute lesbian women for their sexuality. By that, I mean there was not a law which they were enacting. Rather, they simply put people into camps and called them antisocial and not actually homosexual. Whereas men, yes, they did. They had an anti-homosexuality law, which they were enacting. So many people were persecuted by the Nazis on the grounds of sexuality or gender identity. And like I say, there simply are very few stories that are told from that period. So my friend Frank, he wrote alongside a survivor. He actually his story is a little bit different, let's say. You have to read the book really, but he's not a Holocaust survivor in the sense of having been sent to a camp like Auschwitz. He's someone who was able to stay in Berlin I'm sorry if it's noisy. I have a dog with a cone on his head and he's crashing around a bit. And this chap, he managed to stay in the city and then to become part of the underground resistance. And he was a Jewish gay man named Gad Beck. And his story is so remarkable. And he himself was just a very ostentatious character. Now, he died about a decade ago, but he returned to Berlin. He actually lived in Israel for many years, and then he returned to Berlin, and he even gave tours, taking people through that neighborhood where today, you know, I can follow in his footsteps.
Mhm.
So yeah, alongside Gad, my friend Frank wrote this book. It's called An Underground Life. And yeah, Frank was very kind and gave us some more information for the VR tour about Gad and about his experience of working alongside Gad and writing this story. And it's just such an important book. Like I say, there are so few accounts like this, and so yeah, I hope that you'll have a chance to read it if you're interested in this. But the story of this guy is so remarkable, and he was himself such a fabulist. You know, he was such a storyteller, and so some of the elements of it almost seem, you know, inconceivable, but this guy made it through in this manner. Really audacious character, and a gay Jew who managed to make it through by cunning, by luck, and by curious set of circumstances. But he's one of those who, like I say, wouldn't be shy about his story after the war and determined to tell it. And then because of Frank's skill as a writer, Gad told the stories, Frank transformed them into a book, and now we have this wonderful piece of queer history. And so much was lost. If I take that further, the Nazis burned many thousands of books in 1933, immediately after they came to power. And with the books that they burned was the first archive in the world of queer history. And that had been compiled by a doctor called Magnus Hirschfeld. He's someone about whom we talk quite a lot on the VR tour as well. And the Nazis just turned up and burned all that he had done, that they could get their hands on, let's say. Books that he had written were mostly in print elsewhere. So we have the book still, but his archive of case studies, of files, was largely destroyed. So we really do hang on to queer history where we find it. And I think queer people often are not informed or educated. I mean, no wonder there are even laws preventing this education, but they often don't know that they have ancestors, I think. And so that's something so important and so moving and so touching to know, yeah, people like us came before us. And so connections with the past, I think, are so very important. So yeah, please read the book if you have a chance to. I recommend it very highly. An Underground Life by Frank Hybert and Gad Beck together. Remarkable book.
And I think we actually have a link to the book that we sent out post the tour. People, if they are interested to find out more about the story of Gad Beck, which I find myself was really fascinating,
Super.
that they can, purchase the book on Amazon and read it. So I'm
That'd be
really, really
great.
happy that we, got the chance to have that interview and to learn about that story, because I think it's fundamentally very human, but also very inspiring in the sense how he managed to use, his cunning and his bravery to resist and to survive.
Totally, and that's it as well. To return it to an individual story sometimes is so important when you have those unfathomable numbers of people who suffered and died. It becomes almost very abstract, really. You know, to be in these two categories, in this intersection of gay and Jewish identity. And if I say one more thing that Frank taught me also about Gad, just briefly, he said the main element, really, as far as he understood, of Gad's identity, and he knew him intimately, of course, was actually his working class identity. And the fact that in this working class neighborhood of Berlin that you'll see on the VR tour, this area known as the Barn Quarter or Scheunenviertel, the old Jewish quarter, there was a huge amount of, he said, working class solidarity. And that comes through in the book as well. Between Jews, non-Jews, gay and straight people, it didn't really seem to matter all that much. The idea was they were all trying somehow in solidarity to get through this moment. And so I find that also very, very touching to know that's where a lot of the resistance lay, really, with people who were themselves very disenfranchised and they helped each other out. So it was, I think, more to do with social solidarity and sharing this class strata on the hierarchy really working class people, that even I think surpassed a Jewish or a gay identity in some ways. So when Gad comes out, his parents sort of say, yeah, we've got more important things to worry about, you know, which is really sort of remarkable. I mean, of course, there is this one astonishing moment in the book with Gad's boyfriend Manfred, but well, that's something you can read about, I suppose,
Yeah.
in the book, or learn about on the VR tour as well, of course.
Yeah. Thank you, Finn. Should we open up the floor to some questions?
Oh yes,
Guys,
please.
if you've got some questions, you can write it in the chat, or you can turn on your mic and just shout it out into the room. While we, any questions? Does anybody want to shoot any question to Finn?
Oh, I do. Hi.
Please. Hi, how are you,
Hi.
Olga?
Good. How are you?
Good, thank you.
I just wanted to know, I don't know if I missed it, but how did you get into the travel aspect? You know, what started it for you?
Oh, well, I tell you, so I moved to Berlin, 13 years ago, and I was still working at that stage on my thesis, and I wanted a job. And how I started actually was giving these free tours, whereby at the end of the tour, there was a tip or not, and that was quite arduous. I would say it was definitely jumping into the deep end with tourism, but I found that I really enjoyed the job so much, and I found it absolutely fascinating. And the more that I stayed here, the more I wanted to study. So after a couple of years of that, I went off on my own really and decided just to set up my own website. I mean, it took a while, you know, it took a while to build a bit of a reputation and so on to be able to do that. But fortunately, it seemed to work out, and really just word of mouth, you know, spread. I also doing this particular tour, quite a unique element, the LGBT scene. So many people come to Berlin, like I say, to visit that scene and to learn that history as well. So I also got to work, for instance, with a lot of school and college groups who study gender and queer studies, women's studies. And so I have the enormous privilege that I'm able to spend my working life on something that I absolutely feel so passionate about and enjoy so much. But essentially, yeah, arriving here, becoming so intrigued, you know, forwarding the academic study with what's happening on the streets, and then just trying it out and starting to give these tours and having to get over a huge amount of stage fright and shyness. And that all took a while as well. And having to learn the art of tour guiding, which is not only imparting information, but also that's largely about knowing where the toilets are, to be honest, but figuring out how to do that. And so I see that you've also asked about how it was to film a virtual tour. So, or another person asked that, very, very different, you know, to be alone at home speaking into the camera. But that's something that I've become a bit accustomed to lately too, because with Corona, I mean, I haven't made many, to be honest, but I've started to make a few videos also for YouTube and so on, and I really want to pursue that further. So to, in the absence of being able to do live tours, innovate somewhat. Like I say, this is a brand new idea, the VR tour, so I'm really excited to see how it will go. How it'll be received, I mean. But yeah, also making the videos, you know, that's a new avenue in a way that I've started to go down tentatively. It's quite laborious, and I'm no filmmaker, so there's a lot of technicality to learn, but really, really enjoyable. And just whatever I can do to impart these stories that I have heard from other people and pass them on further. So I read voraciously, I listen to storytellers, you know, I meet remarkable characters, and then I try to impart their stories and yeah, just disseminate them wider. You know, that's a great privilege of being here. So most of my tours will involve, as this one does, telling you about my friends, you know, telling you their stories, or telling you about people that I've met, encountered here. I mean, it's such an incredible city full of characters, you know, and particularly anyone, I'm tempted to say of an older generation, but I think that I'm also in that generation. I mean, really anyone who lived during the Cold War. And of course, you also meet many people who lived as well during World War II, and the stories that they have, they're often very willing to share. And so it's a remarkable thing, you know, the longer you live here and the more characters you get to know, the more anecdotes and so on enter into the tours and supplement the dates and the historical facts. And so, yeah, it's a great fun job, you know, I enjoy it so much. And like I say, I'm so happy that we've figured out this new way to do it in this moment. So I'm excited, yeah, to see how you'll enjoy the tour. I hope you'll really enjoy it.
Yeah, so for anyone who doesn't know how the tours work, we actually developed the script together with Finn, and obviously remotely, because we are not based in Berlin. figure out the different locations in the city that we're going to do the 360 shots so that we can essentially create the tour out of them. And Finn kindly agreed to actually take videos of himself so that we can superimpose those into the 360 environment. So actually, when you're walking around Berlin and you're checking out all the different points in it, you know, you're seeing some like videos or photographs in the archives. You also have a small picture or video actually window of Finn, and he's telling you the stories, which is a really cool new feature that we've tried. And this is the first tour that we did it with, but we're really excited that it worked. And I think we're going to keep doing it because it was really fantastic. Someone asked about if the tour is live and where can I go see it. So the tour is actually going to be live tomorrow. I'm dropping a link into the chat, which is goes direct. Sorry, this is a direct message. I'm going to resend that to everyone. There we go. That goes to the landing page where you can actually purchase the on-demand tour. And then right now you can just pre-register for the live tour with Finn. So the difference between the two, on demand is much like Netflix. You know, buy it and you can instantly watch it. And the live tour is going to be a session that's going to be held with Finn, again, within the virtual environment. So you'll get the 360, you'll get all the interactive elements, but as an addition, you also get Finn live there with you. So you can ask him all the questions and get to know more things about the tour. So it's, yeah, going live tomorrow. We're really excited. We already have bookings. Actually, a lot of companies are, you know, booking the tour as a team activity, which we're super excited about. And I think it's just such a great experience to share. And I'm so so happy and proud of the team that we put this together. So yeah, thank you, Finn, for giving us the opportunity to put something like this together. Maybe just to reiterate the virtual tour. Oh, someone's joining. Sorry, let me just admit this person into the room. Newcomers. So obviously the virtual tour is different in this creation and the process of doing it. You know, what do you think is the most valuable thing that people can take away from the virtual tour, as opposed to, you know, what it would be, for example, in a live tour, in a walking tour? Sorry.
Well, I think the most valuable element applies to both. And that's, like I say, having this connection to ancestors and understanding that 100 years ago, particularly 100 years ago in Berlin, there was an emancipation movement, which the Nazis did a very good job of obliterating. So it's our job to reconstruct that and to see there were trans people, for instance, getting new ID cards, changing their birth certificates, having surgeries. This was happening 100 years ago. So those stories I would, of course, impart on a live tour. But I think the real benefit, like I say, of the VR tour is also being able to take in this wider scope geographically that we can hop about the city. So we can actually go to where that institute was in which trans people were obtaining their surgeries, for instance, and we're not confined to walking only in Schöneberg. I mean, depends how long you have. If you want to come to Berlin and it would take several days, you know, we can also do that as well. But in the course of a 1 hour experience, of course, we can cover, like I say, a much wider area, and also to be able to go into this Jewish quarter, as I mentioned. But the main drive behind the tour, in whichever format we undertake it, is to communicate that sense of ancestry that we've always been here. And I think for Pride Month, that's and also in this moment in which we live, more important than ever. I think many people try to discredit queer identity by trying to conceive of it as something new or something almost faddish. And I think a very important part of discussing queer history is to say, no, always here. And actually, it's a great benefit for us to understand that. I mean, there also, of course, are sometimes criticisms that learning about queer history will turn children gay and so on. I mean, it's really so preposterous. And I think to be able to communicate this and to help people feel less alone if they are in the LGBTIQ bracket, but also just to inform everybody about it, to inform friends and allies as well, is so, so important. Evidently not being educated about this, you know, as I was not, for instance, in my schooling, it was not even legal to talk about homosexuality in a positive light, didn't change my destiny. And so I think to be able to talk about it openly, queer history, queer identity is just absolutely vital. So yeah, I'm just doing a little tiny part in that. Berlin is the city that's doing the work in that regard. You know, it's just my privilege to communicate it somewhat in this medium. But that's the drive behind the tour, that people know they're not alone. We've always been here. And the virtual reality benefit is to take on that wider scope. Absolutely. And also to compound it with, as you say, the archival material too, to be able to watch these videos and see the pictures pop up as well. That's something really special. So I think it's a very immersive experience, and one that draws in a lot of media, let's say. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much. And I completely hear your point about, you know, knowing that you have ancestry and that it's not a new thing and a new fad. And there's so many myths that, you know, are being sort of propelled around the LGBTQ identity, that I think talking about it and learning about the history is super important. So yeah, really glad that we can, you know, bring this forward. So we have a couple of minutes left in our time. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask you a question for people online who perhaps may end up going to Berlin. What is a must-see place that they have to go, even if they have like one day there?
Well, I see that Benjamin also asked when I first visited what attracted me specifically. So many different things. It's so hard to say. With Berlin, you need weeks, really, you know, but in the city center, things are really quite compact. And so it's quite possible to see the Brandenburg Brigade, the Reichstag, the Berlin Wall, Checkpoint Charlie, all of this really within one walk, within a couple of hours. Maybe we can also do another virtual reality tour of the main highlights. And that's something as well, when I first got in touch with the company, I certainly expected that your rubric would be World War II sites or Cold War sites. So it's also very touching for me to see that you wanted to focus on this particularly. But I would say if you have a chance to visit Berlin and also, you know, leave the city center maybe and go into one of the suburbs, is not really quite the term. They're their own neighborhoods really, but I would say come over to Schöneberg and you'll see a lot of the pre-war architecture. It was not bombed so heavily. All of Berlin was bombed, but less heavily than other parts. And you can get the sense as to how things were in this period with which I think we're so fascinated, the 1920s, the Weimar Republic, that intrigues us so much, you know.
All right, thank you. I really hope that I get to visit Berlin soon and go on a real, you know, physical walking tour with you. It'd be such a great experience. So Georgia is asking, is Pride going ahead this year?
Gosh, not to my knowledge. I think we'll have some sort of equivalent thereof, but hopefully later in the year, it'll be possible to have, it's sort of Pride all year round in Berlin, to be honest. So there are many events also in autumn time, winter time. There isn't only the one Pride actually, but I don't think that the big street parade can go ahead, no. But subsequent events in the year, I'm sure will, and they'll surely manage some Zoom version of Pride, I'm sure.
Well, maybe we can hold one inside the tour.
Also.
Finn, thank you so much for your time and
you.
for sharing your, you know, knowledge and insights with us. Oh, someone's joining in the room now.
I see a few technical questions, which I can probably not answer, but maybe you could.
Right. Do I need a VR headset? You do not need a VR headset. The tours are accessible from all your devices. So you can watch the tour from your PC, from your mobile, tablet, or of course, if you have a VR headset, that's fantastic. But actually, we know that most people don't have headsets. So we designed these tours in mind with people actually looking at them on their screens, so on their computers. So don't feel like you need to have special hardware. And will I be able to share this meeting with friends who can be here today? Absolutely. We're going to be sharing this recording on our social media channels. So please follow us on YouTube. So we are Globetrotter VR. You'll find a link to the video there. And also please check out Finn on social media. Follow him. He's on Instagram and Facebook as well. Yeah, just keep in touch with him. Perhaps, you'll have more questions, and maybe even go to one of his tours in Berlin when you visit.
Yeah, thank you so much, Benjamin. We've taken a few tours together, so I appreciate that so much. Every time we come back, there's always going to be something new as well, for sure.
Awesome. Do we have any last burning questions for Finn? I think, who else will we eat or meet?
Good question. So we'll talk about Gad Beck, we'll talk about Magnus Hirschfeld, we'll talk about a number of the trans people around in the 20s and what befell them, of course, in the 30s. Lily Elba, for example, whom you might know from the movie The Danish Girl, would be a name to mention. A gay English writer called Christopher Isherwood, who moved to Berlin for 4 years. He came on holiday and ended up living here for 4 years, which often happens. And he chronicled the period in his book Goodbye to Berlin, which later inspired the movie Cabaret. And in terms of the Cold War, a big name to talk about there, of course, is David Bowie, who moved to Berlin for quite some time in the Cold War and lived here in West Berlin and Schöneberg as well. Those are a few of the characters we'll meet on the tour.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks so much for answering that question. Well, Finn, thank you so much for your time again. It was a pleasure to meet you. And everyone else, please do check out the tour. Head over to our website. As I said, you can either purchase the on-demand tour and watch it immediately, or you can sign up to one of the live tours where you'll have a session with Finn live, and you can ask him more questions if you would prefer to have a more social and interactive experience in that sense. So thanks everybody for your time. Thank you for joining. We look forward to seeing you on more lives, and we really hope that you enjoy the virtual tour of Berlin.